The sound of boots filled the canyon, the rhythm of hundreds of feet striking the ground in unison, sending shivers through stone and bone alike. The seals gripped their weapons tighter, eyes darting to the woman who stood at the front, her silhouette, still and unmoving against the firelight, her breath steady as though she had already seen this storm before the commander whispered that they could not win this fight. But she did not respond, her gaze locked on the mouth of the canyon where the shadows grew thicker with every step. The first enemy wave emerged. Rifles raised, voices shouting in a language that cut through the smoke. They moved in lines precise and ruthless, their confidence radiating as they advanced into the canyon. The SEALs opened fire, their weapons blazing in a desperate attempt to hold the line. But for every man who fell, two more appeared pushing forward without hesitation. The canyon became a furnace of gunfire and dust, the enemy relentless, their numbers endless. The woman moved like a ghost through the storm, her rifle cracking with precision, each shot felling a man before he could pull his trigger. She wasted no motion, no bullet, her calm contrasting with the chaos around her. Yet even as her shots struck true, the tide pressed harder. The SEALs found themselves backing against the walls, their ammunition dwindling, their breath ragged. The commander felt despair claw at him, but the woman remained steady. Her eyes cold and sharp, she signaled for the men to fall back deeper into the canyon, her hand cutting the air with urgency. They obeyed, stumbling over stone and smoke, dragging the wounded with them. The enemy pressed harder, sensing victory, their boots pounding louder, their shouts echoing through the cliffs. The SEALs glanced back at the woman, wondering if she would stay behind, but she moved with them, her steps sure as though she carried a plan hidden beneath her silence. As they rounded a bend, the canyon opened into a wider chamber where jagged rocks jutted like teeth. The woman paused, her eyes scanning the formations, her fingers brushing the stone as though feeling for something unseen. Then she crouched, pulling from her pack another set of charges smaller but designed for speed. She planted them along the edges of rock, her movements swift, her breath steady. The SEALs covered her, unsure of what trap she was building in the darkness. The enemy rounded the bend, pouring into the chamber, their voices rising, their rifles flashing. Fire across the walls. The SEALs returned fire, but their strength was fading. Bullets striking, stone sparks showering across the canyon floor. The woman stood tall, her hand on the trigger, her eyes fixed on the tide that rushed toward them. The commander shouted for her to wait, but she pressed the switch and the canyon roared once again. Rocks collapsed in a thunderous cascade, the walls shattering under the blast, the enemy ranks crushed beneath falling stone, their advance broken screams echoing. As dust swallowed the chamber, the SEALs gasped for breath, their eyes wide as they realized the canyon itself had become her weapon. But the silence that followed was short-lived, because through the dust they could still hear the sound of boots. Moving forward, the enemy had lost dozens, perhaps hundreds. Yet still they pressed on, their discipline unbroken, their hunger undimmed, the canyon floor trembling with their march. The SEALs felt dread sink into their bones as the shadows formed once more. This was no ordinary force. It was a relentless tide that would not stop until every man was buried beneath the earth. The commander clenched his jaw, his men waiting for orders, but even he knew words would not save them. The woman stepped forward, her face streaked with dust, her eyes glowing with a fire that made the SEALs pause. She whispered that this was not the end. Not yet. She knelt and pulled something heavier from her pack, a device unlike the others, intricate and dangerous wires gleaming. Faintly in the firelight, the men stared, unable to guess what she planned, but they felt the weight of her certainty, and it steadied them even as the footsteps grew louder. She pointed to the far end of the chamber, where the canyon narrowed again, a choke point of stone and shadow. She said nothing more, but her hands moved fast. Preparing the device with precision, she pressed it into place against the rock, then turned back, her expression unreadable. The SEALs exchanged looks, knowing that whatever she was preparing would either save them or destroy them with it. The enemy surged through the dust once more, rifles blazing, voices rising in fury, their boots thundering across the stone. The SEALs raised their weapons, preparing for one final stand, but their eyes kept darting to the woman waiting for her signal, their hearts racing as the tide came closer and closer, their minds torn between hope and despair. The canyon held still for a breath, the enemy pouring through the choke. Point rifles raised their shouts echoing against the walls. The SEALs pressed their backs against the stone, their fingers tight on the triggers, their hearts pounding in rhythm with the footsteps of those who hunted them. The woman stood in the center, her hand steady, her eyes locked on the approaching tide, and in that silence it seemed as though time itself waited for her command. Then she pressed the final trigger, and the earth itself screamed. The explosion ripped through the choke point, a wall of fire and stone collapsing inward, crushing the enemy in a violent storm. The canyon shook as though it would split open. The men shielded their faces from the hail of dust and rock, their ears ringing from the thunder when the smoke cleared. The passage was gone, sealed by rubble and flame, trapping hundreds of enemies on the other side. The SEALs gasped at the sight, their lungs filling with dust and disbelief. They had been seconds from being overrun, and now the tide had been cut off. The commander turned to the woman, his words caught in his throat. She stood still, her weapon in hand, her face unreadable, as though this had been nothing more than a move in a game she had already played 100 times before. But her eyes said, more. Her eyes carried the weight of choices made long before this night. The men asked who she really was, how she could have known the canyon so well, how she carried weapons and explosives that only elite operators would possess. She did not answer, her silence sharper than steel. Her gaze fixed on the blocked passage where faint voices still cried out, muffled and fading. She finally spoke only to say they had little time because more would come from another direction. Her voice steady yet, filled with urgency that gripped the men tighter than fear itself. They moved deeper into the canyon, guided by her hand. She seemed to know each bend, each shadow, each place where danger could wait. The SEALs followed, though questions burned in their minds. Who was she? How did she learn to fight like this? And why had she appeared at the exact moment when their mission seemed lost? Each step forward only deepened the mystery, yet none dared speak further. They feared the answer would be heavier than the silence. At last they reached a clearing where the canyon opened beneath a broken ridge. The moon cast its pale light across twisted stone and shattered trees. In the distance, they could see the glow of enemy fires spreading like an unending sea. They knew this battle was not over, that even now more forces closed in. Yet in that moment, the commander realized something. This woman had not only saved them, she had changed everything about the fight. The enemy did not just face soldiers. Now they faced her. The SEALs watched as she climbed the ridge, her silhouette outlined against the sky, her rifle slung across her back. Her movements quiet and assured, like a predator moving to high ground. The commander called after her, demanding answers, demanding to know her name. She paused for the first time, her voice soft, but carrying across the clearing. She said she was no ghost, no shadow. She was a sniper. Once bound by chains, now free only to fight where the battle demanded her return. Her words struck the men like stone against glass. She had been trained long ago by forces they did not know, discarded when no longer needed, forgotten by those who once called her an asset. Yet the war had never let her go, and when she saw men left for dead in the canyon, she returned to the place she once swore she would never walk again. The commander felt a chill as he realized they had not been saved. By chance, they had been saved by her choice. The night grew darker, the silence heavier, broken only by the faint crackle of fire. In the distance, the SEALs prepared their weapons, Knowing dawn would bring another wave, they gathered near the ridge, their thoughts heavy but their spirits no longer broken because they had seen what she could do, and they believed now that survival was possible. The commander stood at her side, and though he wanted to ask more, he did not, because he understood some truths were too heavy to carry. And so the night closed around them, the canyon scarred. With smoke and blood, the enemy regrouping beyond the rubble, the SEALs holding their ground beside the woman whose presence had turned despair into defiance. They did not know if they would live through the coming storm, but they knew one thing. The battle would not end as the enemy had expected, because now there was someone in the shadows who would not miss, who would not falter, who would not forgive. And with the wind cutting through the canyon carrying whispers of the next attack, the woman raised her rifle and set her sights on the horizon, leaving the men in silence, knowing that when dawn broke, it would be her trigger that decided the fate of them all. The chopping of rotor blades grew louder, filling the night sky with a sound that carried dread through the hearts of the SEALs. They turned their eyes upward and saw shadows cutting across the stars, black figures of helicopters sweeping toward the burning camp, their searchlights slicing through smoke and flame. The commander clenched his jaw, realizing the enemy had escalated beyond trucks and rifles. This was a storm they were walking straight into. The woman crouched low, her rifle sliding. Back into her hands, her eyes narrowed on the moving shapes. She tracked their speed, their altitude, the way they banked against the wind. She could tell by the formation that these were not just troop carriers. They carried gunships armed with cannons, heavy enough to tear the ridge apart. The SEALs tightened their grips on their weapons, knowing that rifles would mean little against steel birds that breathed fire from the sky. The commander whispered for them to hold position, hoping the smoke from the detonations might conceal their movement, but the woman shook her head. Her voice low for the first time since the firefight began, she told them they had to move into the canyon or they would be wiped out. Her tone carried no hesitation, no question, only command. The SEALs hesitated, then obeyed, following her down the jagged slope into the dark shadows below each step, echoing with the thunder above. Dust poured into their eyes as they moved, the air vibrating with the approach of the helicopter's spotlights sweeping across the valley like pale swords cutting through the dark one beam. Passed so close the SEALs froze against the rocks. Breath caught in their throats, their bodies pressed to stone as the light lingered. Then, moved on, one whispered that this was suicide, but she pressed forward, her body low, her hands guiding each man through the maze of stone. At the canyon floor they found cover among broken boulders, the sound of engines deafening. Now the woman turned, her rifle skyward, her eyes cold, calculating. She tracked the flight path of the nearest helicopter. The commander hissed that no one could make a shot like that, not against steel moving so fast in the dark. But she had heard those words before, and each time she had buried them beneath the crack of a rifle, the SEALs watched breathless as she steadied her aim. Her first shot rang sharp, splitting the night, the bullet streaking upward, vanishing into shadow. Seconds later, sparks erupted from the tail of the nearest helicopter, its body twisting wildly, the rotors screaming as it spun, the pilot fighting for control. The SEALs ducked as the machine fell toward the ridge, slamming into the ground with a roar of flame and smoke, the sky lit with fire, the men stunned by the impossible shot she had just placed. The other helicopters veered off, lights cutting through the smoke weapons, firing blindly into the canyon walls. Rocks splintered around the SEALs, dust showering them as they hugged. Cover, the commander shouted for them to move deeper. But the woman stayed still, her eye to the scope, her hand steady. She fired again, her rifle bucking against her shoulder. Another shot piercing the night, one helicopter swerved too late the round. Tearing through its cockpit, the machine lurched and dropped into darkness. The canyon shook with the impact, debris raining from above the SEALs, scrambling as flames licked across the rocks. The last gunship roared higher, its cannons spitting streams of fire across the valley, trying to flush them out. The woman shifted position, sliding across stone. Her rifle steady, she drew a bead on the gunship as it banked in the moonlight. Her breath slowing, her finger tightening, the commander shouted for cover. But it was already too late to stop what came next. The rifle cracked. The round soared, and the helicopter shuddered, its engine coughing smoke pouring into the night. It veered hard toward the horizon, limping away rather than falling the pilot. Desperate to escape the fury from below, the SEALs erupted in disbelief, their voices hushed with awe as they realized what they had just witnessed. She had not only shattered the camp, she had brought down the fire from the sky with nothing but her rifle and her will. The commander stared at her, unable to speak, his men surrounding her with eyes wide with respect. Fear and questions none dared to ask. She lowered the rifle, her breathing steady, her gaze already shifting toward the deeper canyon shadows beyond. She knew this was only the beginning. The helicopters were not the end. They were only the first wave, and what followed them would be even more relentless and even more deadly, waiting in the dark ahead. The rumble grew louder. Echoing through the canyon walls, the SEALs pressed against the rocks, listening to the grinding of treads, the earth trembling beneath their boots, dust trickling down from the cliffs above. The commander cursed under his breath, knowing that the enemy had unleashed armored vehicles to hunt them. The woman did not flinch, her eyes narrowing as she studied the faint glimmer of headlights crawling through the smoke like predators closing in. She signaled for the men to move deeper into the canyon, her hand gestures sharp and decisive. They followed without hesitation, their bodies sliding between stone and shadow hearts pounding. As the engines grew louder, the air thick with the smell of fuel and fire. The canyon narrowing into a maze that could trap them as easily as it could protect them. One wrong move, and the enemy armor would crush them beneath steel and fire. The first armored vehicle emerged from the haze, its turret sweeping across the canyon mouth, its searchlight cutting. Through the smoke like a blade, the SEALs dropped to their knees, rifles ready, though they knew small arms fire would do little against such monsters. The commander whispered that this was hopeless, but she crawled forward, pulling a pack from her, back her hands working swiftly as she assembled something from the shadows, a shape of steel and wire, the men recognizing it as a charge. Her fingers moved with speed and certainty. She shaped the explosive with the calm of a craftsman, placing the detonator with care, her eyes never leaving the lumbering machine that inched closer. The SEALs covered her, their rifles spitting bursts at shadows of infantry dismounting from the second vehicle. The canyon filled with echoes of fire. The woman slid into position, pressing the charge into a crevice of stone, then pulling back fast, her breath steady as the armored beast drew near. The explosion ripped the canyon apart, fire leaping skyward, stone shattering under the force. The first vehicle lurched sideways, its tread blown apart, its body collapsing into the dust flames licking across its hull. Enemy soldiers screamed as they spilled into the canyon. Stunned by the blast, the SEALs surged forward, seizing the moment, rifles crackling. As they cut down the disoriented fighters, the commander shouted orders, his voice fierce, his men rallying with sudden fury. But the second vehicle pressed forward, its turret blazing a stream of fire against the canyon wall. The SEALs scattered, scrambling for cover, stone erupting around them, dust filling their lungs. The woman darted between shadows, her rifle slung as she pulled another device from her pack. This one heavier, more intricate, her eyes scanning the canyon walls until she found what she needed: a ledge above, waiting like a dagger ready to fall. She began climbing swiftly, her body moving like a shadow. Bullets tore across the rock around her, but she did not slow, her hands gripping stone, her boots pushing upward, her heart a steady drum. As she reached the ledge, the SEALs below saw her silhouette against the flames and knew she was risking everything. The second vehicle grinding closer, its engine growling, its gun spitting fire. The commander cursed her recklessness, but inside, he knew she was their only chance to survive this canyon alive. She set the device against the rock, her hands swift and sure, pressing wires into the cracks. She armed the charge and dropped back down, her body hitting the canyon floor hard. But she rolled, rising instantly, her eyes fixed on the advancing vehicle. She waited, breath held, as the turret turned toward her, the barrel yawning like the jaws of a beast. She pressed the trigger, and the night shattered once more. The ledge above the vehicle. Collapsed stone crashing down in an avalanche of dust and fire, crushing the machine beneath a mountain of rock. Its gun silenced its body, broken. The canyon roared with the impact. The SEALs stared in awe, their ears ringing, their hearts pounding. She stood calm among the smoke, her silhouette rising through the chaos like a figure carved from steel. The enemy infantry scattered, fear gripping them as their armored support vanished into rubble. Silence returned to the canyon, broken only by crackling fire and the groans of wounded men. The SEALs regrouped, their faces grim, but their eyes burning with renewed belief in the woman who had just defied death twice. The commander stepped toward her, his voice low, demanding to know who she was. But she shook her head. Her gaze fixed deeper into the canyon where shadows twisted and a colder, darker sound began to rise. It was not the rumble of treads nor the chop of blades, but the measured, synchronized stomp of boots. Hundreds of them. Moving as one, the echo bouncing off the stone walls, a sound that told them the enemy was no longer sending machines, but men wave after wave, closing in their footsteps, sealing the canyon tighter with every breath. The sun baked down on the dusty ridge where the SEAL team crouched, hidden beneath broken rock and sparse brush. Their eyes locked on the valley below, where an enemy convoy rolled into the camp. The commander scanned the terrain and shook his head. The distance was staggering. The heat shimmer distorted every outline, making targets blur together. He muttered, "No one can hit that," his words cutting sharp into the silence of the men. Beside them, she lay prone, her rifle steady the long barrel of her weapon balanced against the bipod, her cheek pressed to the stock. Her breathing slow and even. The SEALs glanced at her as if she were an outsider, just the woman assigned to cover a flank. Their doubt clear in their eyes, she ignored them, her focus narrowing her pulse, a calm river as she studied the three figures emerging from the armored vehicle, their uniforms marked with insignia that sent a chill through the team. These were the enemy generals, the men who orchestrated ambushes that had cost American lives, the ones whose orders had painted whole valleys red with blood, the commander whispered again. Impossible. No one could make that shot at this range, not through the haze, not with the wind carving invisible paths across the canyon floor. The SEALs tightened their grips on rifles, knowing they could do nothing to reach those men from here, and believing the moment would slip away. She adjusted her scope, the world shrinking into a circle of glass. The shimmer faded into shapes. She could read the weight of the air, the subtle pull of the breeze across her skin, the rise and fall of the dust devils swirling near the tents. She had done this before in training in combat, in nights when silence was the only witness. Her mind tracked distance, bullet drop, wind drift, and the rhythm of her own heart, each beat a mark upon the unseen clock ticking in her chest. The commander crouched closer, his voice low. "Do not waste ammunition," he said. "It is already lost," but she did not answer, her finger curled lightly against the trigger. The steel cool beneath her skin, her other hand steady on the grip, her eye never leaving the scope. The generals moved slowly now, one lifting binoculars to scan the ridge, the others conferring. In hushed tones, their gestures sharp, their voices carrying faintly across the valley. Her world narrowed until all else vanished. A breath in, a breath out, her body melted into the rifle. The trigger broke like glass beneath her finger. The first shot cracked across the canyon, sharp and final, the sound echoing off stone walls. The SEALs flinched as the round tore through shimmering air. They leaned forward, watching through optics, disbelief tightening their jaws. The first general staggered, his knees folding as he collapsed into the dust, his cap spinning away into the wind. The commander froze. His words caught in his throat. The second shot followed almost instantly. Her body cycling the bolt with practiced ease, the rifle barked again. Second General spun backward, his arms flailing as he fell against the armored door soldiers nearby, shouted, chaos erupting in the camp. Her eyes never left the scope, calm as ice, her breathing unchanged as if time itself bent to her will, her focus, still fixed on the final target. The third general raised his hand, shouting orders, his voice carrying sharp and angry across the canyon. He pointed toward the ridge, his finger tracing the place where she lay hidden. The rifle rose once more in her. Hands the scope clear, the crosshairs steady. Her heart slowed, her finger pressed, and the world cracked. A final time, the third general staggered, eyes wide with shock, before he collapsed into the sand, his men scattering in terror around him. Smoke drifted from the rifle barrel, her cheek still against the stock, her breath a whisper. The SEALs stared wide-eyed at her, then at the valley where 3 bodies lay still. Their disbelief heavy in the silence, the commander lowered his binoculars. His lips parted. No words escaping, for what he had just seen shattered every certainty he carried about skill and about who this woman really was. The question of her identity now burning in every mind. The valley below erupted, soldiers running in every direction, their command gone, their plans in ruin. The SEALs whispered among themselves, voices hushed and awed as they watched the camp fall into chaos. She remained silent, her rifle still cradled against her as though waiting for another signal, another target, another moment yet to come. None of them dared to ask her who she was or how she had done what they believed impossible, for the silence around her held the answer. The SEALs pressed deeper into the rocks, their radios buzzing with coded chatter, the valley below in chaos. Enemy fighters running like ants without direction, trucks, idling soldiers shouting into handsets as if the voices of the fallen generals could rise again. The commander studied the woman beside him, his mind replaying the 3 impossible shots, his disbelief struggling against the truth in front of him. Yet he asked nothing because the answers might carry weight heavier than steel. She lowered the rifle just enough to check the chamber. Her movements, calm, deliberate, like someone who had lived her life waiting for moments such as these. Her breathing, steady eyes scanning the horizon beyond the burning camp. The SEALs shifted uneasily beside her, whispering among themselves. One asked if she was even human. Another muttered that maybe she was the ghost. The legend spoke about the one that enemy fighters swore could kill without sound or warning. The commander raised a hand, silencing them, his voice low and steady. He told them that reinforcements would arrive, that the chaos below was only a spark before the firestorm, and that they had to move now. The woman looked at him, her expression unreadable, then shifted her gaze back to the valley. She spotted dust rising far on the horizon, vehicles speeding toward the camp, the reinforcements he spoke of the moment narrowing as if a storm pressed closer each second. She slung the rifle across her back, fluid and silent before any of them could ask. She began crawling across the rocks toward a narrow ridge leading downward. The commander hissed at her, demanding where she was going. But she did not answer. She only moved with the same steady rhythm, her body blending into the terrain like smoke slipping through cracks. The SEALs had little choice but to follow, their boots crunching softly against gravel, hearts pounding as the shouts from the valley grew louder. At the base of the ridge, she halted, raising her hand. The SEALs crouched low around her, their weapons ready, her eyes fixed. On a cluster of supply crates left in the shadow of an outpost, the enemy had not secured them yet in the panic of losing their generals. She moved toward them fast and low. Prying open the nearest crate, inside were explosives and ammunition stacked in careless piles, the kind of fortune that could turn a retreat into devastation. The commander realized her plan in an instant, his voice sharp, as he warned her they had little time before reinforcements arrived. She only gave a brief nod. Her hands, already working with the explosives, her fingers deft and sure as though she had wired countless charges before the SEALs watched in silence, astonished at how quickly she set traps connecting lines of fire to points that would tear through enemy vehicles when they rolled into the camp still. She did not speak, only worked with cold precision. The sound of engines thundered across the canyon, the reinforcements drawing closer, their headlights piercing the haze of dust. The woman glanced once. At the commander, her eyes steady, her expression unshaken. He ordered his men to cover her as she completed the final placement. Then together they pulled back into the rocks, vanishing into shadow the valley below. Now a killing ground waiting for a single spark to ignite it. The question of who she really was growing heavier in every silence. Engines roared as trucks poured into the camp, soldiers leaping out, shouting confusion, colliding with rage commanders scrambling to seize control of broken ranks, the three generals gone and fear spreading like wildfire. She held the detonator in her palm, her thumb resting lightly on the trigger, her breath slow. She looked at the commander, who gave the smallest of nods, her eyes locked on the camp below. The moment stretched thin like a thread ready to snap. A thunderclap split the night fire erupting from the heart of the camp as charges tore through vehicles and crates, the explosion rolling like a wave through the valley, screams rising. In the smoke, the SEALs pressed deeper into cover, their ears ringing, their hearts pounding. The woman never flinched, her face lit by the firestorm, as if she had seen this vision countless times before. Debris rained from the sky and the camp below, dissolved into fire and dust. The commander stared at her as the echoes faded, his voice hoarse when he finally whispered that no hairdresser, no outsider, no recruit could ever have done what she had done. The SEALs turned to her, waiting for an answer, waiting for a revelation. But she said nothing, only rose to her feet, her rifle slung once more across her back, her eyes fixed on the horizon where darkness hid new dangers, waiting just beyond the flames.